we're looking at. All right, welcome back. Let's move in now to the. Are you all seeing the screen, guys?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. So we're looking at these leadership theories and how they arose. So we're gonna. This is sort of like a walk back in history. So we'll be looking at that from this perspective moving forward. All right. So the first theory is the great man approach, and this theory um, is based primarily upon Darwinistic thinking. And if you remember Darwin, for any of you who might have done some science, Darwin believed in survival of the strongest. So basically, the great man theory was proposition upon the idea that you had people who rose um, to positions of authority based upon their genetics. It was kind of a dangerous thing. So that the great man theory spoke to, welcome back, Mr. Leon. Well, Mr. Leon's here twice. All right. So here you have basically men, because again, we're talking about prior to the 1800s or 1800s to 1900s or so, um, whose um, genetics based upon birth gave them some form of power and strength. Generally, it's usually going to be strength because war was one of the ways in which it was determined who was going to be the ruler. And in order to maintain that connectivity to that genetic base, what you had was intermarriage of those people in those classes. So kings would only marry queens from families that had that type of stuff. So it actually created a lot of problems because the aristocratic class was very closed off, and therefore you had a lot of inbreeding taking place, which caused a lot of problems in the past. And of course, back then only men could hold positions of power. At least that was the thinking. So people like Joan of Arc and Catherine the Great were ignored as women who rose to um, prominent positions of leadership in society. So if you look at any of those older programs where you have kings and queens and stuff like that, you see the whole concept of marriage and linearship and that type of stuff was very, very important in terms of determining who remained in power or who was eligible for power. So that's where the great man theory. So you had to come from a family of great people to be a leader. So if you came from a family of poor people, and you will never be a leader, all right? Because we had that theory then eventually in the early 1900s led to the trait theory. So instead of just looking at one particular group of people or family, they started to look at a set of traits that the individuals will have that mark them as a strong leader. Um, so here you're talking about that particular traits such as intelligence, height, self-confidence. What they're not talking about here is they were also white or Caucasian, blonde, blue-eyed, and so on. And therefore, they would only be leaders because they had these particular traits. Um, Interestingly enough, research failed to produce the list of traits that ensured that the persons with these particular traits will be leaders. So therefore, the kind of observation of characteristics and the family tree or the genetics kind of failed pretty early. Well, I mean, don't say pretty early, 1900s, and that then gave role to the aspect of behavioral sciences trying to come up with approaches for leadership research. And that brought us to the behavioral approaches. So this was where literally what will happen is that the scientists or the behavioral scientists will go into different contexts. Generally, it'll be managerial, or businesses and observe the activities of managers and look at what they were doing, classify what they were doing, and then begin to observe how often they did particular things to be able to determine what sets of behaviors gave rise to the better managers or the better leaders in that particular context. So you had a couple of theories that emerged from this particular field of study, and you'd see that this historically this field of study was really in the 1950s and 60s. Now, here you're talking about just post-war, so heavy industrialization is taking place. So the focus is on industrialization. You had the advent of division of labor and mass production. So those types of factory floors is the general thinking of success and successful leadership would take place in that particular context. So this is going to have a big influence on the type of theories that emerge. So, for instance, Ohio State and the University of Michigan produced two dimensions of managerial behavior towards subordinates. Their theories came up with two behaviors called consideration and initiating structure. So basically, consideration is the amount of activities that the leader utilizes that was seen as supportive and friendly towards subordinates. And therefore, that they call it consideration behavior. Then you have the initiating structure, which is the actions of the leader or the manager that was geared towards trying to get the subordinates to do the jobs that they were required to do, which is the attainment of the group's formal goals. So in terms of production base. So they were seen as being independent of each other, and therefore what they were trying to say is that the more you did of one thing as opposed to the other, that will tend to develop some sort of concept of, well, this leader is better because they utilize more considering and less initiating. And then you had the others where they're focused on better output and that type of stuff. So they came up with these behaviors that they were looking at. Another set looked at another, this is Blake and Morton. They looked at concern for people and concern for production, which is pretty much the same thing that we looked at before. So again, concern for people would be actions taken by the managers that displayed concern for people, and concern for production was actions that was focused on getting the production coming up into the realm that they wanted to get to. So using this model, they came to the conclusion that effective managers showed high concern for people and production. Well, duh, kind of thing like that. Feel free to ask questions if you see things here that are of concern to you. So the Michigan studies also included the identification of relationships among leader behaviors, group processes, and measures of group performance. So they came up with three different types of behaviors: task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behaviors, and participative leadership behaviors. So again, they were looking at what were managers doing. Task-oriented would be those that are around for operational types of activities. Relational-oriented would be those that allowed for one-to-one leadership behavior or relational building behaviors, like lineman with the boys drinking after, going for a drink afterwards, having a chat, sharing a joke, that kind of stuff. And participative behavior would be where the manager engaged in some sort of a group activity to get consensus or to pass on information, that type of stuff. Those kind of things were what they were looking at and classifying from that particular context. All right. Welcome back, Mr. Rampol. So those were the types of activities that they start to measure, or behaviors, I should say. So the problem with this approach is that, as we can see here, in each of the cases, they came up with 2 or 3 behaviors that they figured would give a good explanation as to who would make a better leader than the other, and totally ignored the situational variables in terms of what were the situations in which these things were taking place. And as a result, coming out of that study, those studies in the 50s and 60s, the results proved to be inconclusive and inconsistent. So there was no combinations of activities or behaviors that really spoke to why one person was better as a leader than another. So, of course, eventually these theories were abandoned and moved on to other things. Then we had, now taking into consideration now, before they ignored the circumstances or the situation, now they started to build theories that took that into consideration. So in this approach, they would look at the behaviors of leaders in various contexts or situations. So the situation determines who would emerge as leader, with the leader being the product of the situation. So that's the kind of backbone or genesis of what they were thinking about here. How does the effects of leadership vary from situation to situation? So the contingency theory really is based upon what are the contingencies under which any leader is operating, and how does that person rise to the occasion and therefore become an effective leader. So of course, it's trying to say now that leaders' behaviors can't be explained without understanding the circumstances under which they operated. So the two major situational theories were the least preferred co-worker. That's a wonderful name. And there's another one we're going to get into a bit, where Field developed this in the mid 60s, and it describes a situation, um, describes how the situation moderates the relationship between leaders. So the situation is kind of tempering the behavior between leaders, their traits, and their effectiveness. So one is impacted upon the other in terms of what they do. Least preferred co-worker. That name just speaks volumes in itself. The next one was gold path theory, which originated in 57 by Giorgio Poulos. And he posited that if a group member perceives high productivity to be an easy path to attaining his personal goals, then they will tend to be able to produce, to be a high producer. But if personal goals are obtainable in other ways, then they're not likely to be high producers. So the task of the leader, therefore, was to make sure that the personal goals of the individual needed to be as a result of the rewards for the person meeting the production goals of the company. So they have to lay out that path so that the company will benefit before the individual gets their rewards in terms of. So here you see the sort of beginning of motivational theory coming up here. How do you motivate people to perform better in an organization? That is, you need to have some sort of personal gain, so carrot and stick type of thing going on here um, in terms of the nature of how that. Of course, these theories found that there was a lack of supporting research, and there was a very unclear association between the commitment and the competencies of subordinates and their levels of development. So overall, these theories kind of failed because, again, the results turned out to be unclear, and of course, non-committal type of theories. So again, these theories, or the contingency theories, or situational contingency approaches, then moved into this area here, the influence theory. So we kind of go backwards here, because here we're talking about something, we were talking about the late 50s, but we seem to be going back to 1920 to 1947, where Max Weber used this. And if you remember Max Weber, any of you all, you would have come across, or we tend to call him Weber, but because it's Germany, because he's German, the W is pronounced like a V. So Weber was developing this particular theory, influence theory, during the rise of Hitler, because Hitler was seen as being a very charismatic leader. And he was looking at the way in which charisma in a management context was one of the main forces that needed to be observed in order to look at the effectiveness of your management, so that managers who had high levels of charisma would be able to get more output from their workers or their subordinates because they were able to influence people. So this is what we're speaking about here. Now, that theory was further developed in 1977. Robert House proposed the formal theory of charismatic leadership that was explained by a set of testable variables. Now, what charisma was listed therefore in terms of what are the things that make you charismatic? Tone of voice, your shape of your face, color of your skin, tonality of your vocal patterns and your speech techniques and that type of stuff. These were some of the things that they started to talk about in terms of being charismatic. Now, what ended up happening when they did this theory, the influence theories, is that they started to realize that charisma was not something that they could have really attributed to the person themselves, but they had to attribute it to how people responded to them. And therefore, the situations in which they found very highly charismatic people being successful would be circumstances in which there were problems that we were facing, and the movement of people during that period of time was to kind of kick against what was going on all the time, which means they're challenging the status quo. So these theories kind of looked at that situation and found that charismatic people in periods of social unrest were likely to be more effective because people were willing to challenge what was happening in the country or in the circumstances at that point in time. And that is where you find charismatic leaders tend to be more successful than others, in terms of having more influence, because basically people are fed up of whatever conditions are existing. And if we think about Germany at that point in time, they were experiencing very high levels of inflation. They just come out of World War One, or what they call the Great War, and they were in abject poverty. They were forced to repay the rest of the world a phenomenal amount of money, in reparations for the damage that was done to the other countries during that war, and that led to a lot of the discomfort and disquiet among the German people, and that then led to the whole movement of Nazism, because they were utilizing the disquiet and discontent of the population to be able to rally them into behaving a particular way, because again, they were fed up of the circumstances they found themselves living in, and they wanted to find a way out. Easiest way would be to find a particular set of people to blame for it. So the bourgeoisie was being blamed, the Jews were being blamed, anybody who was not German was being blamed, any outsiders. So you had a whole set of situations that came up there. So again, Adolf Hitler and some of his other leaders, Himmler and the others that came up, were persuaded through the charismatic speeches of the leader, which was at that point in time the Hitler, to be able to come forward with that. And another observation that was made was that charismatic leadership has mixed reviews, because again, it's mixed because some charismatic leaders did good things and some charismatic leaders really did poor things. And the problem with that is because when, as I say here, too much deference to individual leaders by followers can create a dangerous scenario where leaders misuse power or deliver a vision with an empty dream or perverse concepts. And that's what ended up happening in terms of charismatic leadership. So we don't look at it as one of the key, but it was one of the developmental theories in terms of influence. How is it that an entire nation of people were convinced to wage war against the rest of the world was because of the nature of influential theories that it talked about here. But it was an influential individual operating in the context of a downtrodden set of people who were looking to blame others for the position they found themselves in. And literally, they ended up in that position because of the actions of the then government of Germany, and they found these convenient scapegoats to blame, and that then led to the Holocaust and all that type of activities that went on coming out of the German movement of Nazism and so on. I mean, there were people there who would have stood up and said, but most of those individuals got up and left. And I think there's a very famous thing where evil evil succeeds where good men stay silent, something along those lines. There's a quotation like that that evil breeds or survives or multiplies where other people are sad, and that is something like apathy. We find ourselves in Trinidad, for example, having that kind of situation that a lot of bad things are happening because a lot of us don't say anything about it. We just let it go, and that's not necessarily a good thing that is happening around us. All right. Okay, so that those influence theories then gave rise in the 70s to the reciprocal leadership theories. Now we have to think about what do you remember about the 1970s? Anybody?
So before you go to the 1970s, I just want to ask if sometimes some charismatic leaders they instill fear sometimes with their followers so that they would actually um, follow them. And sometimes they don't even have the opportunity to ask questions because
Well,
they are fearful to what the leader might say or belittle them. So sometimes they stay silent and just follow.
don't do anything.
So
Yes, you're correct but by the time they got to that stage of it means that the person had already gained enough influence to have sufficient people to support him to put others down, and that's what took place. Anybody who spoke up against the Nazi movement at that time frame were put down by others. It's how charismatic people they the charismatic people. All right, so let's look at something that happened that was really in recently when Trump was was moving towards his first elections, and he was in a situation. Remember, he started to he had people in the audience that were coming to listen to him who were protesting. And what happened to them? Members of the crowd of his audiences jumped on them and beat them up and threw them out. And that is tantamount to what was happening when Adolf Hitler was addressing people. During the meetings, he had these loyalists, basically, he called them the brown shirts, who would um, get rid of anybody who might have raised any sort of objections to what he was saying at all, which meant that they kind of browbeat everybody else. But what was happening was that he was saying things that everybody wanted to hear. They wanted to hear, this is why we in this position. This is why we having so much problems. So if you draw a parallel to what Trump did in his elections campaign, you found that a lot of people were looking for, well, why is America not great? And this is why he was positing, this is why these people did this, that people did that, and I'm going to make this people do this. You remember all that whole wall nonsense, and make the Mexico pay for it, and then you'll deal with China differently and all kind of. So basically, everybody else was wrong, and he was able to garner a lot of people's support for his presidential run because he was able to take their fears of what was going on or what they saw was going wrong and saying to them, I have the solutions, put me in power, and we'll fix these things by doing so and so. Remember, he talked about draining the swamp and all that kind of stuff. And you had people, excusing him from making all these sort of nonsensical statements that he made, like, um, you remember that pussy grabbing statement that he made and was overheard with, and they called it locker room talk and all kind of nonsense. You all remember any of that stuff back from his and I'm not even talking about Hitler. I'm talking about Trump's run for president. Anyway, so I was asking another question in terms of the emergence now of reciprocal leadership theories. What was happening in the world during the 1970s? Come on, think. All right, so the 1970s was a period of time during which the United States was at war in Vietnam, and there was a heavy anti-war movement in the United States and in other parts of the world. And there was this movement towards peace and love and flower power and hippies and one love and open love and all this kind of stuff. You all remember that? The hippie movements and the
The
emergence of
hippie.
hippie movement, yeah, and rock and roll and folks and conscious music and all that type of stuff was coming up during this period of time. So think about that background and look at the nature of reciprocal leadership theories. These theories focused on the relationship between leaders and followers. So if we think about what was going on there, everybody wanted to create a more utopian society where everybody was working together for high ideals, a better life, where there was truth and there was fairness for everybody, and everybody was important. And whether you were a leader or a follower, everybody had a role to play. So reciprocal leadership theory started to reflect, I think, from what my reading, the the thinking and the kind of philosophy that was taking place at the time. I found it really funny that I was reading through these things and making a note of the historical timelines of what was happening around us, around people at that time, and what was emerging in the theory. So obviously, the context of the world at that time was influencing the development of theories to explain leadership. So these theories posited leadership is not just something that a leader does, but to followers, but rather what leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contribution of the participants, shares power and authority between leaders and participants, and establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. And that whole togetherness, we're all together in this thing. That was that kind of movement of the 70s and latter, coming into the 80s and stuff like that. So yeah, that flower power, it was latter 60s into the 70s. That's the whole rock and roll revolution and the emergence of the flower power, the Woodstock era, um, the drug culture, of course, with opioids and all type of stuff, and that whole set of stuff that came up, and smoking grass and all that kind of stuff. Everybody wanted to chill out and have a good time and commune with the world around them. That also led to the development of a number of cults as well. So we'll get into that as a little bit as well. So the idea now is that all these theories started to come up, and it showed, or it emphasized, that leadership can't make decisions without taking the people that they're leading with them. The followership was important, and they had to be um, related to each other, and they had to make these connections all the time. So across the board, you have these main theories coming up: the transformational leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. All of these theories generally, so the transformational leadership theory formulated by James McGregor define leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. So again, the same thing we're talking about: higher levels of ethical values, and high levels of motivation, getting things done. So everybody feeds back one on the other. So it's a give and take. It's a circular type of system where the leadership transforms the followership and the followership transforms the leaders, and everybody's being held to these high levels and high ideals. Important for us to think about it from that. So it was also about look at these things here. Leaders appeal to followers higher ideals and moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, humanitarianism, not to the lesser emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, or hatred. Like I remember back in that time, you also had the Watergate scandal where one president was found to be spying on others and claimed to be not a liar, and all these kind of things influence the thinking of we can't have leaders that are um, not that are liars and they hide the truth. So those are the kind of things that started to become more important to the movement or the thinking, that we had to have a higher ideal than what was currently being in place, because you had a situation where people were hiding information, they were involved in a lot of cover-ups in terms of the what was going on in Vietnam and why they were there and what was taking place. A lot of the information was being hidden, and all those things kind of developed a lot of the thinking and the theories and generated the concept of this transformational leadership theory here. So all of it was really based upon that, and it spoke to that interrelationship between the two. All right, and power was something that was shared between the leader and the followership. So it was really going to be an important element, was going to be the grounding of the ethical values that kind of led to the whole thing. All right, so power is used to realize common goals and purposes, not for the purpose of exploitation or manipulation. That was something else that was important too, because the operations and the activities of the United States in Korea and Vietnam during that period of time were seen as exploitative, because what they were getting involved with there was really based upon the self-interest of the United States. And you realize that a lot of these theories, they emerged out of the US think think tanks, think tanks, because they were at the kind of cutting forum of leadership theory. And of course, what was happening in the United States would influence the entire world, because at that point in time, they were sort of like the leaders in theoretical development at that particular time in terms of leadership theory. All right, now let's go to these are some transformational leaders that emerged, or we could look at through history. So we know John F. Kennedy. He asked not what you can do for your country, well, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That was a pivotal switch around. Um, that kind of led that movement into a better day. Mahatma Gandhi, he made his conversion through non-violence. Remember that whole thing, and he was very unhappy when India and Pakistan kind of went into riots and all that type of stuff. He made that massive transformation to freedom and independence. You had this gentleman here, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who led a country through civil war to free the slaves, because he was trying to say that everybody was every human being had the right to freedom. Later on, we had this gentleman here, Martin Luther King, who took that movement forward in the civil rights movement. And then we have this gentleman here. This is Franklin Roosevelt. He was a president during in World War II, and he led the country out of World War II. Well, I should say he was also more importantly, he led the United States out of the depression of the 1940s, 1930s, um, into a more solvent period during the war. So he's also known for transforming the economy of the United States into the major economic power it then became just before and after World War II. And then, of course, we have this young lady, this nun here, Mother Teresa, who actually is a very transformational leader because she spoke to people about, remember, her order is one that embraces a life of poverty and a life of serving people who are less fortunate than her. And she raised lots and lots of money to bring relief in India to a lot of children in particular and women who were suffering from poverty and malnutrition and poor hygiene and all those kind of things. So these were leaders who sought to transform the lives of individuals in their various spheres of activity. So that's why we refer to them as transformational. Um, so one comparison that's always made is between transformational and transactional leadership. So transactional leadership is a type of leadership where, in order to get something done, you have to trade off something with that person. So if you want to get um, somebody to do something, you have to offer them something of value in return. So that's a transaction. So it's sort of like, you go to work because you get paid, kind of thing. So, and if you work well, you meet this benefit, then you'll get a bonus, and those types of motivational approaches, as opposed to transformational, which is trying to motivate people to want to make changes in society or want to make things. Now, the thing about it is that people tend to look at transactional and transformational as opposite ends of the spectrum, but they can work together, because in order to make certain types of transformations, you might need to attach to the transformation some transactional values exchanges to get it done. Okay, so that makes sense across the board that there is a relationship between the two, and leaders can engage in both transformational and transactional. All right. So critics of this theory focus on the fact that it lacks a lot of clarity and specificity because of its kind of hairy-fairy, pie in the sky, um, idealistic type of approach. So that's the major criticism of these types of theories, or that particular transformational theory. The servant leadership theory, and I always think about Mother Teresa when it comes to this, is that the leader is the servant of the followers. His role is to motivate people and empower them to become the leaders for tomorrow. And that's basically what the role of the leader in the servant leadership model is going to be. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this theory because there is a presentation from the DAFT that one of the groups is going to be spending a little more time in terms of developing this particular theory. Um, so I'm not going to go through all of the details for it. But at the end of the day, the basic premise of the servant leadership is that the function of the leader in these organizations or under this system of leadership is to prepare others, empower others to become the leaders for tomorrow. That the people that are leaders now, we are simply just the what's the word I want to use? We are holding we're the trustees. That's the word. Oh, there we are. Yes, trustees that are keeping this organization in trust for those who are coming to follow. And our purpose is to get other people to rise to the occasion and get them to take charge of it. So that is the whole thing. It's about empowering others to be able to do things. So that servant leadership process is leaders have to take a servant role to those around them. Now, a lot of leaders don't like this model, primarily because they don't see themselves as being, or they don't like to see themselves as a servant to others. Now, there was one political party that attempted to use this, but I don't think it was kind of bought into by the rank and file of the political party. If you remember when Ms. Bissessa became prime minister, the last time when before the, well, I can't remember all these times, but when she became prime minister, the motto that she utilized was service, service, service. You might remember that. But what happened was a lot of the talk was about service and serving others and lifting up and empowering them and that type of stuff. But the problem was a lot of the people in the political um, organization didn't really see it. They saw it as an opportunity to, get what they wanted from the situation, and that probably is partially responsible for the failure of that particular government because it didn't follow through on that service movement that they spoke about before. That servant leadership model wasn't something that people bought into um, because of the expectations that they wanted to get the things that they wanted. So a very selfish type of movement that they looked at here. All right, so I'm going to skip over this and go to the followership theory. In the followership theory, it's viewed that um, um, leaders have to look upon their followership as being a critical and um, very important part of the leadership that they're going to be or the organization that they're going to be taking part in, because the leader and the followers have equal importance but different types of things that they have to do. Obviously the leader is there to motivate, empower and stimulate change. The followers are there to hold the leader up to um, higher levels of behavior and that type of stuff. So basically, one supports the other, and in order to be able to achieve the best. So Kelly spoke about this before, and I think I showed this diagram that represented the 5 follower types: the alienated, the sheep, the yes people. So what you wanted to do is to have more effective leaders, and effective leaders are those leaders, um, those followers, I should say, who manage themselves well, are committed to the organization and to the principles of the organization, and persons outside themselves. They build their competencies and focus their excuse me, they focus their efforts for maximum impact. They're courageous, honest, and credible, which means that you can't a leader can't come on and bring something that is not what we are collectively agreed to work on. So the reciprocal nature of the leadership is that followership and leadership work together as like co-adventurers. That's a nice term for them to look at it. There's no big difference between the leadership and the followership. They're really just everybody working together to get something done. And effective followership and effective leadership kind of go hand in hand. Followers have to be empowered and honored for their contribution, valued for their satisfaction, take pride in their work, and again, remember, everybody's holding themselves to high ethical values and high ethical standards. So the followers hold the leader up under scrutiny, and the leader holds the followership up under scrutiny. So everybody's kind of trying to make sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to do with the overall impact to be able to get these organizational goals achieved across the board. All right, so um, so new paradigms that are coming up. Um, so what what Ross is talking about here in terms of emerging paradigms is that he's talking about when the original leadership theories were being developed in the earlier 20th century, it was based upon the concept of industrialization. We spoke about this before. The early theories in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, they were all posited upon the, the, the understanding that the world operated from the industrial revolution, basically, or the industrial paradigm, as talked about here. So if you look at a lot of the theories, they were really focused on how do firms produce goods and services? How do we get the best out of them? And that type of focus. And that industrial paradigm, it changed in the 20th century and the 21st century. So that the 20th century, we had the theories that kind of represented what was going on in the industrial area. They were structurally and functionally focused. They were management oriented, personalistic and focused only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self-interest, individualistic in outlook, male-oriented, utilitarian and materialistic and ethical perspectives, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific and language and methodology. Now, if any of you all have the ill ever have to go back and look at some of these theories that came up during this period of time in terms of in the industrial era, you'd see a lot of what I call statistical analysis and correlative analysis being utilized. A lot of stats being utilized to try and prove that this particular theory works, and these are the things that workers need to do. It was actually referred to as industrial leadership and industrial theories, and a lot of basically a lot of stuff that was relevant only if all your businesses were operating on all activities were based upon industrial production. So that's why it was in particularly male oriented. So a lot of theories posited the gender bias and of course the materialistic approach to things, because at the end of the day, the successful leader was the one that produced the most amount of profit and through output. Least cost, highest output. That was the kind of situation we're looking at. So all of the theories were built and designed around this particular context. So in order for us to look differently in terms of how theory should be more reflective of the world, we started to look at the transformation outside of that industrial focus into the reciprocal theories. Those reciprocal theories was a paradigm shift during that changeover in the latter part of the 20th century, where people started to kind of look and say, this industrial approach not really meeting the requirements of the societies that exist in the post-industrial time frame. After you've done and you've gotten all your stuff completed, you have a situation now that you have to be looking at are the leadership theories addressing the societies that we have today. And the societies that we have today, what are they concerned with? Is it only output, or are we looking at the nature of life, the fairness of life, the quality of life, the quality of our societies? Those are the kind of things that became more important. And more importantly, another thing that we had to look at was that the amount of change that was taking place in a very fast way was increasing, because one of the things that we found happening is that knowledge and information exchange increased dramatically during the period, especially with the internet coming into play, because all of a sudden the world was at your fingertips. You were aware of changes taking place everywhere simultaneously, and that kind of changed things a lot, because it means that the context in which things were being done was no longer isolated by time and space, because everything could be seen and heard immediately and live all at once. How many of you all looked at live coverage of the Black Lives Matter movements in the United States? Any disaster happens anywhere in the world, immediate television coverage, immediate internet coverage. Any kind of riots break out anywhere, any sort of major activities, news cycles start on at one time. And it means that the problems that we started to face, the theories that we had, were not going to be able to deal with circumstances that were like this. So we have to have new theories. More importantly, most of the theories were taught to us, were hinged upon a concept of the world being neat and controllable. And this speaks to people who have ADD, and like me, have um, you know, oh God, what is the good? I actually suffer from it. Um, where everything has been neat and tidy. Anybody knows that terminology again? It's escaping me at the moment.
ADHD,
Not ADHD. That is
OCD.
OCD. Yes. If you're OCD, this is not a nice statement to listen to, because what it's trying to say to you is that the world today is not that neat, controllable world where we could write a theory and it will sit on that controlled environment. The world today is messy. It does not stay the same. It changes very rapidly, and order is not going to be what is happening. Things are a mad rush to get all kind of things done. And that means that the world today is surrounded with chaos, and that we actually have to learn new theories that are developed out of trying to work in a chaotic environment. Now, chaos theory is where what emerges from this. So this is one of the other theories that we're looking at here. So for example, look at this other quotation here. To successfully navigate in this world, new maps are needed. Maps describing the leadership that is needed in an era of rapid change. Now, that means we have to start thinking from a fundamentally different place. And this is something that I mean, I come from a very I was in primary school a long time ago in the early 70s, and latter part of the 60s. So it means I am kind of steeped in this whole concept of the world is an orderly place. To come into an environment now where the world is not an orderly place, the only place that's orderly is what you can immediately impact upon, and even that is not orderly. All right. So therefore, people with OCD issues will have a problem operating in a world like this. Because when you go out to the world of work, think about, for example, just the pandemic that took place. The level of change that took place in such a short space of time. Look at you all now, attending classes online. Would you want to go back to where you were before? I know they've been trying to get you all to go back into physical classrooms, but it doesn't seem to be working. Why is that? Why do you think students are not responding to face-to-face classes as much as we thought they would? This is a time for sharing, guys. Why are you not going back to classroom classes? Nyla?
I guess I think it will be easier in terms of transport and my job.
Time.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're saving a lot of money by you go to work, you come home, and you're in class based upon
Yeah.
it. And you're in class at your own convenience and your own comfort, correct?
Yeah.
Right. And I know every time we start like this class, for example, you know why the enrollment is so low? Because it was listed online as a blended class. So a lot of people saw the format for this class as being blended, and they shied away from registering for this class. But the classes that were online, they locked out first. They filled up before everything else. And it keeps on showing that trend that students would prefer to be in a situation where they weren't forced into doing face-to-face classes. But again, that happened out of a very chaotic period of time. that chaos theory is really reflective of what's going on in the world. So we need to create models of leadership as well as other models that deal with the issues of leadership in chaotic periods. So chaos theory has two elements that chaos has been defined as order without predictability. So even though it appears to be chaotic, there is some order. It's just that we can't see the order because the level of chaos is kind of beyond our perception. And chaotic behavior has two important characters. It is inherently unpredictable, and while at another level, it displays a hidden pattern. So the patterns in the chaos are not clearly visible until time passes. The problem is by the time that passes, the time passes and you see the pattern will then change. And that creates a bit of a problem because you're forever playing catch up. Now, obviously, we have to have a different type of approach to dealing with these things. So in this chaotic world, which they refer to as a quantum world, a world of wholes, not parts. It is a connected world in which relationships become the most important thing. It is a world filled with strange attractors of meaning and force fields that help shape the behaviors of individuals. I found this quotation so interesting. But what does it mean? It means that there are some elements in chaos theory that are important. And the first thing is that we have to realize that we cannot control the world around us, and we have to pay attention to those things that we can have some influence on them. And the one thing that they talk about is that we need to be able to look at and remember what caused the first condition. That's what we call initial conditions. It is important for us to pay attention and remember why the change occurred. No, that's not, unfortunately, sometimes the why element, sensitivity to initial conditions, are also called the importance of initiating initial conditions, implies how something began greatly determines where it ends. Now, that's why, because think about who you are today. And one of the assignments you have to do is to write your own autobiography. And the objective of that is to look in a retrospective manner and try to work out why you are the person you are today. So you have to go back to where your initial conditions existed. What were the conditions that existed that shaped the person you are today? And it's the same thing that they're saying with chaos theory, that we have to pay attention to what initiated the changing environment so that we can look at the connection between what caused the change and where we end up, because we could start to probably see the pattern and predictability of what is likely to occur if we pay attention to what the causative factors were. And in so doing, we have to also pay attention to the nature of the connections and relationships. So they keep on talking about in that thing, the theory refers to it as the andness. Pay attention to all the ands that you're making or the anding that you're doing. So it's this and that. So you have a problem. It does not only require one thing, it's this and this, or it's you and this person working on this. So that anding becomes a critical method of dealing with it, because if you think about any particular problem or issue that you may be facing or that is facing us as a society, no one clear solution will exist. It will be a combination of partial solutions that could come together and hopefully fix the entire issue or treat with as much of it for us to be able to move forward. Okay, so this is where they talked about um, if you can successfully and with the concepts of chaos theory, you will see countless examples of this in example. It is also important to note you need to shift our thinking to a systemic leadership is both and not either or. All right, so it's both and not either or. So it can't be right and so Something might not be right or wrong. It might be right and wrong. So this is what we're talking about, partial solutions. Something is right and wrong at the same time. And that's the whole anding thing that's going on there. Um, so it's a whole set of things that we need to start to become accustomed to, because um, the solution, for example, to that we utilized to deal with the pandemic here um, was a complete lockdown. That turned out to be a mistake, because it meant that when we did something along those lines, we had economic failure taking place in a lot of businesses. Even to this day, there are lots of businesses that can't reopen because they just simply didn't survive the whole situation. But if we had looked at that again, what we did was right and wrong. It was right because it was able to mitigate against the amount of fatalities we probably experienced. But it was also wrong in the sense that economically we were being destroyed. So one goes in hand with the other, and that's the whole issue with chaos theory and chaos systems. So systemic leadership is anding. It's both and not either or. So you have to kind of open your eyes to look at things and not just look for right and wrong, but look for, all right, we could use a little bit of this piece and a little piece of this, and we'll get a particular solution for things. So you have a number of different correct answers coming out of a number of wrong answers that come up with, and that kind of speaks to it doesn't track with what how we've been taught. We've been taught primarily like mathematics. There's always one solution, and that's because the world is either black or white. But the chaos theory is telling us the world is not black or white. The world is shades of gray, and you have to be able to look at the good in all aspects and different perspectives. So I know this theory sounds really confusing, but you have to think about it from the perspective of when you're faced with periods of absolute chaos, how do you go about navigating your way through it? And one of the things is a lot of us tend to want to put order onto that chaos, but you can't, because you remember the chaos is outside your element of control. You can't control a lot of things. All right. And there's no one simple answer for everything. Will require us utilizing everybody's input, everybody's point of view to be able to arrive at several different responses that give rise to an overall solution. I mean, think about the problem of global warming here in Trinidad. You think any one individual can come up with a solution? It has to be a host of different activities that have to take place on a sustained basis to be able to mitigate against the conditions that we find ourselves facing. We just can't, bury our heads in sand and say, this too shall pass, that kind of thing. Any questions, concerns at this point in time? Kalisha, chaos theory sounds like chaos. All right, so obviously the theory sounds very vague, and it is vague because if you ever go reading into this area, there's a lot of if anding and this there and it speaks kind of like against our circumstances where we like to see things black and white. But the reality is that the world is not black and white. According to this theory, in this theory, the world is shades of gray, and we have to take every shade and look at it and extract from each shade what is good, what is bad. So things aren't just wrong or right. They are both. Quite an interesting perspective. So let's leave this one because again, this is the last theory here that they came up here. The latest development is a concept called authentic leadership, and basically what it is that authentic people make for authentic leadership. Now, what do they mean by an authentic person? So, authentic persons are let's look at it. And the authentic leader is somebody who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future-oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. Okay, so let's look at this thing here. How possible do you think it is to find somebody with all these characteristics? Josiah, if you could contribute, it'll be nice. Do you think you could find one person with all of these characteristics as becoming an autistic leader? Rampol?
With all of the characteristics?
All of these characteristics. I doubt. Would you think you could find somebody
no.
with? Yeah, high likelihood you might get somebody with a few of them. But does that mean that the person is not authentic?
No.
Right, and that's the thing. So what I've found with this particular theory, that there's one of the latter theories that came up, as you can see, 2003, 2006, 2009, they come up from this period. I find this theory to be very what's the word I want to use? Unrealistic and very idealistic. But what is the good thing about an ideal? Anybody?
Idea?
An ideal. What is the function of ideals? Go ahead, Josiah.
Well, it's basically like a perfect scenario, no?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily reality.
Right, but what does that perfect scenario give us? Josiah, you were a management student?
Yeah, management, yeah.
Did you do economics, yeah? Microeconomics?
Yeah.
Did you do perfect markets?
Perfect markets?
Yeah,
no.
In theory of the firm. You had to do perfect markets in theory of the firm.
Perfect market.
Yeah, the perfect market.
Yes, I can't remember.
How long
That's a while now I did. That's a while now I did.
Naila, you were a management student?
Yeah, but I don't remember that, honestly.
I can't believe this. Anyway, the perfect market is a non-existent market. It is called the perfect market because it doesn't exist, but it gives us an ideal against which we can measure reality. And that's the function of ideals or theories in a lot of instances. You put all the ideal circumstances together and it gives you something against which you can measure reality. So you probably won't get somebody who has all of these characteristics according to the authentic leadership description, but you can get somebody who can work towards becoming that idealistic type of individual. That makes sense? Yes, Ms. De Leon.
So when you said the
Yeah,
perfect
sure.
market, you were speaking about like, for example, I don't remember we were talking about like in economics when they were saying like e-commerce and agriculture, these things could be an example of the perfect market.
No, they can't. They are close to perfect, but they're not. All right. So yes, you're right. Agriculture and online markets come closest to perfect markets. But you see, in any perfect market, everybody has perfect knowledge simultaneously, and that could never happen in the real world. Yeah, that makes sense, Leon. So it's called perfect competition or perfect markets. You might remember it from that perspective.
Yes.
All right. So trust me, that's my area of specialty. So you understand what the function of this authentic leadership model is about. It's about describing an authentic leader in an idealistic fashion that has, as I said, a confluence of positive psychological transformational leadership and moral and ethical leadership. All right, so they go on to talk about persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity and that they know who they are and what they believe and value, and they act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with others. Again, I've always looked at this theory and said, this is a really pie in the sky kind of thing. Will we find people like this? And at the end of the day, possibly not, but we might get somebody who tries to ascribe to it. They may fail, but at least they're trying to move towards that thing, because a lot of our leaders suffer from that anti leadership pill kind of thing that we talk about. Nobody believes them. We don't trust them, because far too often they've disappointed us, and that is something that authentic leadership tries to pit itself against. A lot of people might say, okay, maybe, and again, it depends upon perspective too, because a lot of people looked at Obama, for instance, as being an authentic leader. But the fact of the matter is that there's a whole portion of the world that looked at Obama as being a distrustful person because they didn't trust him because of his background and his color and that type of stuff. So there's a whole set of things that authentic leadership is speaking to. But it is speaking to it from the perspective of it being the perfect situation that exists. And it is one that is posited so that, and I think it's down in one of the explanations here. Right. Note that authentic leadership theory stresses the idea of leading by example through setting high moral values. What's the next one? Right. Authentic leaders do not fake their leadership. Relatedly, authentic leaders do not take on leadership roles or engage in leadership activities for status, honor. Authentic leaders are original, not copies, yada, yada, yada. But to remember that authentic can be direct. I have the slide twice. Oh. I want to get where, all right, studies on leadership was described with the but phenomenon. All right, sorry. All right, so basically, as I said before, authentic leadership speaks to all these idealistic types of actions that a lot of the theorists kind of spoke to here as they described the theory, all the good things about that authentic leadership. And I mean, honestly speaking, I mean, we really need truly authentic leaders to kind of move things forward. But whether or not we can find individuals who are capable of authentic leadership, be transformational, be authentic, be, that kind of stuff, all of those things are kind of important, problematic. So the idea would be that a lot of these theories that we've looked at before, if we start to look at the chapter summary. So we looked at the beginning, what the context of leadership coming into this was. We also looked at the whole situation with how leadership emerged, the concept of the wording of leader and leadership, how leadership was defined. We looked at all the theories that came up out of it, and we looked at the latest development in terms of authentic leadership and transformational leadership. As we move forward, we're going to find that we have to pay attention to a few of these theories to explore them in a little more detail to make sure that we kind of grasp them as pretty important. So servant leadership is one that comes up. Transformational leadership is one that comes up, and transactional. Why they come up is because they play a great role in the relational leadership model, and we need to understand them in a little more detail. So as we move through the summary here, so we also explored chaos theory, and systems. Again, you all can read this one on your own and that kind of stuff. But what I want to do is take you to see, finally, we introduce the emergence of authentic leadership, which is focus on leadership as a core aspect of our very being, hope, trust, and positive emotion, and concern for understanding of the attitudes and behaviors they follow. Authentic leadership offers a new way for us to look at leadership moving forward. However, so this is what I wanted to say to you guys here. So I know this presentation has been long, but you're not required to memorize anything. You just kind of have to think about it. The concepts and the ideas are always going to be in the text. The presentation is there for you to download as well. Try to understand as much as you can, and there are no examinations in this course, so you don't have to stress over that material. So just try and grasp from it the whole momentum that leadership took as it moved through. And one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is how the growing global trends at any particular time fed into the theory development as it moved through the years. So whatever was popular belief structures or belief systems that started to become culturally dominant in any environment, they had an impact upon the nature of the theories that we have emerging in leadership and studies. So there's again a kind of environmental impact upon leadership studies as we move forward. All right, anybody has any questions they want to ask on these models that we looked at, or these leadership theories that we looked at? No? All right, so next week what we're going to be doing is we're going to be paying attention to we're going to examine the relational leadership model in a lot of detail, because that's what the third chapter is going to be. And then after that, we start to get into your presentations and your teaching sessions. All right. Must apologize today. I had an early meeting this morning. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so I'm feeling a bit tired. So my voice and even my face looking a bit sleepy. Sorry about that, guys. All right. No questions, anybody? Everybody's okay? Again, you have time to
Yes, no,
go.
fine.
Okay. All right. I need to speak to Miss Rampol because she's new to us. I'm gonna put her in one of the groups, so I'm gonna have to update the online listing. Just to let you all know, somebody who's here might be able to tell. Now we haven't seen Miss Daniel come up yet, and again a little worried now because we are close, and Daniel has to work on that. So I'm gonna make a all right. So on Ms. Rampol, I'll speak to you in a little more detail, but Ms. Morris, I've switched out Ms. Rampol with Ms. Williams as your partner for presenting chapter 5 on the 28th of March. Ms. Rampol, Ms. Morris Webster, Chanel is here with us. I would is she here? Oh crap, that's what she was. All right, but she's on the have you joined the WhatsApp chat by chance, Ms. Rampol?
Yes, yes, sir, I am on.
All right, so I want you to touch base on the WhatsApp chat with Chanel Morris Webster.
Chanel Morris Webster. Okie doke.
All right. She is your partner in presenting one of the chapters. I'm kind of moving somebody who has not yet turned up in class around a bit, Miss Daniel. So I'm swapping you out because you have two presentations to do. One from one from presentations 1 to 5, and another one from presentations 6 to 7. So I have you coupled with somebody else there. So I need to. I'm gonna put Miss Daniel. With Nyla, I'm going to put her alongside you and Reed in presentation 4 on the 4th of April. Hopefully she'll turn up in time. If she doesn't, you all could go ahead without her because
What's her name again?
Daniela Williams.
Okay.
I'll give you her ID number for you to contact her.
Excuse that which myself and Miss Webster, what day is it?
I'll give. This is Rampol speaking.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'll give you that. The day is the 28th of March.
28th
That's not
of
next
March.
week. Yes, the week after.
Week after. Okay,
Right. And you're presenting chapter 5 from the main text, but I'll go through that with you privately. I have to make some more adjustments here to kind of minimize the impact of Miss Williams. Right. Six. All right, I have to make some adjustments here because if Miss Daniel doesn't turn up, another person I'm not seeing coming as well is who hasn't turned up yet, but they enrolled in class last week was somebody called Paulina James. Paulina James. So I'm gonna have to reach out.
Are you sending Daniel's ID here?
Yeah, let me give it to you. Her ID number is 74072. It's a new student, so I don't understand what's going on. So 0007407 at my.costat.edu.tt.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I hate when this stuff happens. All right, guys. Well, oops, I should put down the. Stop the recording now.